Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us on News from the Heart with Swami Chetanananda. And I'm Heather George, and hopefully you all have been joining us in a few of the other episodes. Today I wanted to ask Swamiji some questions personally on something that's happening in our country right now that is amazing to me. And it's in a state that Swamiji is very familiar with, which made me think of it as well. The Religious Freedom Restoration Act in Indiana. So here's my big question on it. Or at least how I've been looking at this, and I'm sure many of you may know about this act. We can talk a little bit about what it is, but loosely, and from maybe a more liberal's perspective, it seems like an act that allows for discrimination, businesses to discriminate or make choices based on their religious preferences.
I think that was the specific intent of the act.
Okay.
Even though they were all to the national media denying it, but the people who sponsored the bill, the organizations that wrote the bill, are still to this day saying, that it should be okay for businesses to discriminate against anybody they want. And, of course, I have a few things to say about that. The first thing is that this is just the beginning of the conservatives' attempt to restore Jim Crow. And, the real target of all of these anti-gay issues is black people.
The target is not gay people?
The target is gay people, but the bigger target is black people.
Oh, okay.
Because once it becomes okay to discriminate against gay people, then the next thing is it becomes okay, after a while, to discriminate again against black people. And I think, my own feeling is, looking at all of the factors that have converged in the United States and sort of come bubbling to the forefront in the last 6 months, my real feeling is that the religious right is losing on the issue of abortion. That was a red herring that they threw at everyone for decades. The whole intent, they it's like my parents were very pro-life. And I say to them, okay, Mom and Dad, have you ever been to a slum in Bombay or in Brazil or Calcutta? Have you ever seen a real slum? Do you realize that once, these babies are born in completely toxic environments, they have no food, they have no pure water to drink, 80% of them, will be dead in 10 years anyway of some kind of disease. My parents say to me, after they're born, it's really up to God. Mm. We don't care what about the quality of their life at all. We only care that they get born. And I thought this was the stupidest, most obnoxious argument that it's okay to bring a baby to term, but it's okay, it's a must that we bring them to term even if they're going to die in the first year anyway. Let's destroy everybody's lives. So these people are completely and totally wrapped up in their own agenda. The church, the politicians, the oligarchy uses religion to completely confuse people and turn their attention from the economic issues, which are the reality of our political life. The real role of government is to, distribute resources. Government exists to support the distribution of resources and protection of the community. But those are the two functions.
Ideally. Is that the ideal reason?
That's the real reason you have government. The real reason the rich people. Control government is to make sure that the distribution of resources is institutionalized in equity.
So even with the Religious Restoration Freedom Act, allowing people to deny
wait. So we were talking about, I just wanted to use an example of how mindless all this stuff is, and how readily most of America will latch on to a red herring.
Yeah.
The red herring was abortion. And it used to be that the red herring was homosexuality, was a backup, red herring. Well, now the religious right, I mean the autocrats, the oligarchs, the religious right are losing these red herrings. People have now gotten over all that. So the next red herring, it seems to me, that's coming along down the pike is racial warfare, or at least, racial-based community conflict. What happens in Ferguson, what has happened all over the United States is appalling. But, this trend can be used to the advantage of the oligarchs if they can continue to spread fear and distress among the members of, citizens of our country, and encourage people to be armed and to shoot at each other. And so starting with Florida, where you have that open carry, stand your ground rule, which is total bullshit and people are using to kill each other. Trayvon Martin gets killed, and what do we discover? That there are approximately 5 times more white teenagers than black teenagers in the United States, but unarmed black teenagers are killed by police at a rate of 35 to 1 in the United States. So, this Indiana law, well, it's funny because I know some of the people, let's say I used to know some of the people behind this law very personally. Okay. There's a guy named Jim Bopp who is an important manager for the Tea Party, who went to college at Indiana University the same time I did, and who became chief counsel for the American Right to Life movement, chief legal counsel. He's a very dedicated Catholic, and when I knew him, a nice person. But even 40 years ago, God, almost 50 years ago, in college, the conservatives demonstrated over and over again that their use of the word freedom was, only so far as, went only so far as to give them the freedom to legislate any rules they cared about to dominate and require everybody in the culture to live exactly as they thought we should be living.
Their freedom.
And has nothing to do with freedom at all. It has, and continuously, I saw this kind of lame bullshit trick, dozens of times in college where people would just say, this is what we've got to do. We've got to ban all beer on campus for everybody, and they'd sneak it through. They'd sneak through the legislation somehow and create a rule which was so wacky that the whole student body would rise up and crash it, push it back, just like happened in Indiana. These guys running the government in Indiana now are the most immature, adolescent politicians I have ever been exposed to in the whole of my 50 years of public adult life, and I'm stunned by them. But, they represent the mindset of a very significant number of people in the United States, and they are absolutely, definitely in the pocket of, the largest percentage of billionaires in the U.S. who may, decry the stupidity with which and blatancy with which they went about their ham-fisted effort to suppress gay people, but and to like whip up their own following. But I think it was too much even for their supporters. It was too stupid, it was too badly executed. This is embarrassing, not just to those politicians and the people of Indiana. This is embarrassing to the whole country. But these are the same people who are passing open carry laws all over the place. And in Kansas this week, the Tea Party governor who cut taxes in Kansas, declaring it would stimulate the economy, only to create a $500 million budgetary shortfall in Kansas, decided to deal with it in part by closing schools at the end of April. Now, say what?
That's his way of cutting budget?
No, dealing with a budget deficit. But here's the issue. Since Ronald Reagan was elected, public education has been in the sights of the conservative right, because democracy, real democracy, requires an informed public, and the lack of public education is a whole part of the program to make us completely stupid and susceptible to their fear-mongering. So the Indiana law, is just the dumbest and most embarrassing demonstration of, an attitude which is exactly the opposite of the attitude which our practice should engender within us. It is based on a completely wrong view of human beings, understanding of human beings, and what it leads to is a reactionary life of fear and hatred and anxiety and suffering for everyone. Our perspective is that each person is a manifestation of divine creative energy. Because that divine creative power is at the core of everyone, each person has the opportunity to create their own life, to paint their own canvas, as I sometimes say, and the responsibility to paint their own canvas. And it is whatever happens, positive or not so positive, because I don't believe in negative, whatever happens, the person should look to themselves and take responsibility for that creation, rather than run around blaming, black people or gay people or whatever people. Because in fact, the whole spectrum, each human body is a curtain of light, a rainbow curtain of light. And what colors predominate is really dependent on, the placement of that person in history, in time, and geography. And each person has the right and the responsibility to express themselves as they are. And any fool that thinks, sexual orientation is something that a person chooses needs to go back to grade school. So, we'll stop on that point. Now, I can carry on, but let's don't.
Something that sort of answered the question that's been in my heart around this stuff always when it comes up since I was a little girl is you've answered, and you used words like everything from mindless to stupid to fear, which all, when we don't use our heart and minds, we make our decisions based on fear. And I'm trying to be compassionate for the people that make these decisions to understand that. But and what you just said was such a beautiful illustration of what we do need to focus ourselves on when we make these decisions.
I think the main thing, Heather, is this. You grew up in West Virginia. I grew up in Indiana. Actually, I grew up in Connersville, Indiana. I attended Indiana University. I lived in Bloomington, and for 17 years I founded the ashram there. And
you were a religious organization
right,
in Indiana.
Right. So we grew up in the same environment that the people who created this law and the reactionary laws of the state of Wisconsin. We grew up in the same environment as these uber-conservative states. We know exactly what the gut feeling of their intuition of these people is. We understand that. We experience that every day. We even at some point in our lives early on said the same words that they're saying now because that's what our parents were saying and that's what everybody around us was saying. We experienced that. And as we experienced it, something about that language and that activity, did not ring true for us, and which I think is true for everyone, but we were able, for whatever reason, to acknowledge that untruth and turn away from that untruth to the higher truth that is inside us, that is, that the love in our heart informs us that it is important and necessary to embrace everyone in the field of that love, to respect everyone. And, for me, I've lived with a minimum of 100 people for the last 50 years. That group has constantly been turning over, and I'd have to say, one of the most informative and educational experiences of my entire life is being involved closely with a flow of people who represent every ethnicity and every degree of sexual orientation that you could possibly experience. And it is wonderful to have the opportunity to share my life with the people I have, and I feel like it has enriched me enormously. And so these stupid people who cannot really listen to their own heart, suffer, they cause suffering among others. This is really a terrible misfortune, and a demonstration of the tensions and bigotry that represent the lowest dimension of human understanding.
Thank you for representing the highest.
Thank you, darling.
I hope all of you, wherever you are in navigating your process with spirituality and with making decisions, got something out of this. I definitely did, and that's what News from the Heart is all about. So thank you, Swamiji, and I look forward to talking to you about so many other things in the future.
Love to talk with you, Heather.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.